There are people who believe that they have a God-given right to rule over others. They believe that their outward appearance is superior to all others. They harbor selfish ambitions to be rich and to have power over what they describe as common people. They lie, cheat, steal, strangle, stab and slash their way to power. They believe that their actual willpower, what the British occultist Aleister Crowley described as the will of Thelema, the royal will, must be obeyed. Literally millions of people have been slaughtered at the behest of the royal lust for war. And thousands of people have been assassinated so that demonic dukes and killer queens can reign supreme. This cabal of crowned killers use the global network of secret societies, loosely described as the Illuminati, to do their bidding and killing. The conspiratorial view of history is the correct view of history. Conspiracy to grab property, conspiracy to make illegal profits, and conspiracy to assassinate has been the driving force behind the royal political elite for thousands of years. Many people believe that conspiracy in world politics simply does not exist. But it is a provable fact that the royal political elite have committed murder to gain power over and over again throughout the ages. Many of these murders were the result of a conspiracy usually orchestrated by politicians and aristocrats serving members of royal families. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar was stabbed to death on the Ides of March. This was a conspiracy. US President Abraham Lincoln was shot at point-blank range by a distant relative of the British Prime Minister's wife, William Booth. This was a conspiracy. Every November the 5th, the Gunpowder Plot is celebrated. Guy Fawkes planned to explode a bomb beneath the Houses of Parliament. This was a conspiracy. In recent times, we have seen the last truly popular president of the United States, Mr. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, assassinated. This was a conspiracy. According to Muhammad al-Fayed, Princess Diana was the latest victim of a royal conspiracy in which she was allegedly murdered under orders from the British royal family. History teaches us that the royal elite have killed before, and it is most likely that they will kill again. Many people believe that capital punishment, usually in the form of hanging, is no longer permitted in Britain. This is not so. The royal family still reserve the right to prosecute and then hang someone if found guilty of treason. Treason, in its most harmless form, is simply criticism of the royal family. A more serious form of treason would be to conspire, just as Guy Fawkes did, to attack the very heart of the royal political establishment. And another serious form of treason would be to accuse the royal family of murder and thus turn public opinion against the monarchy, possibly resulting in the dethronement of the royals. This film does commit treason, but it is the truth. History tells us that the German impostors who occupy the British throne have consistently tortured, illegally imprisoned, and even murdered, sometimes with their own hands, people who have criticized the monarchy throughout history. This film, for the first time ever, exposes the murderous and, in some cases, downright satanic activities of the monarchy. Let it begin. For the crowned killers of Europe, torture, disemboweling, hanging, burning, strangling, poisoning, and killing in the most satanic manner is the order of the day. This is the modus operandi of royal families. For centuries, the royal elite have devised terrible punishments for anyone accused of treason. The monarchy reserved the most disgusting forms of torture and death for those who questioned the royal will. A so-called traitor would often have each arm and leg tied to 4 horses, which were whipped to gallop in opposite directions, thus ripping the victim into 4 parts, whilst still alive. Often, the royal elite would divide the victim's heart into sections and send these for public display to different parts of the country as a macabre warning. The British throne has been bathed in blood for centuries. At one time, Britain contained several small kingdoms. These small kingdoms, ruled over by an intermarried, self-elected elite, were gradually amalgamated into the single monarchy which rules over Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and secretly controls the United States of America. As each decade dawned, the most ruthless, cunning, and murderous monarchs assassinated the regional kings and seized their property. Over history, the most heartless, cruel, disgusting, dishonest, and psychopathic royal family would triumph, eventually establishing a global empire where ordinary people are crippled with taxes demanded by a monarchy living on the other side of the planet. The so-called British Empire, which at one time included Hong Kong and India, was created by blade and bullet. The so-called royal family which triumphed is basically German. They are seated on almost every throne in Europe. They are the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Battenberg bloodline, which often intermarries with the Hesse-Kassel German nobility and claim Jewish descent from the royal house of David in ancient Israel. They raise their children without love or compassion, breeding each successive generation to be at the head of a military establishment who keep an angered peace by use of fear, surveillance, and war. By the 1600s, the thrones of Europe were mostly occupied by Germans, which had super wealth, earning vast profits from peasant labor, outright slavery, and the international opium trade. This Germanic family, known as the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, the Schleswig-Holsteins, the Habsburgs, Romanovs, and House of Kassel-Hesse shared the same tiny genetic bloodline. This can clearly be seen in a photograph of the British King George V standing beside Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Queen Victoria is considered the most British of all queens. Her husband was German, and she wrote letters of state in German. Contrary to what the royal spin doctors have written in the school history books, Queen Victoria was not popular. She was often hissed in public, and there were no less than 7 attempts to kill her. Keeping the populace ignorant, using adults and children alike as virtual slaves in workhouses, providing no adequate protection against hypothermia, working every man and woman to exhaustion, and imposing a crippling poll tax was the modus operandi of Queen Victoria and all her relatives sitting on the thrones across Europe. So-called Victorian values allowed children to be used as slave labor. Inhumane slums and widespread poverty was common across the whole of Europe right up until the 1970s. Even now, in the 21st century, large numbers of British people live in concrete boxes without adequate education, and therefore unable to find a profession to lift themselves out of poverty. There are as many homeless people in Europe today as there were 50 years ago. Today's royal family is in power due to the bloody, horrible, murdering activities of their forefathers. By the second half of the 16th century, the major bloodlines which sit on the thrones of Britain and Europe today were already established. One of the most vicious crowned killers was Tsar Ivan IV of Russia. His mother fell foul of one of the most common forms of royal assassination. She died of poisoning when Tsar Ivan was just 8 years old. The young Tsar took great advantage of his royal will, what Aleister Crowley described as the royal thelema, a Greek word for willpower. All monarchs can exert their will and decree any act, even murder and rape, and act above the law. When he was just 9 years old, Tsar Ivan started torturing animals. This is a practice which is continued in ritual form amongst initiates of the Ordo Templi Orientis, a secret Masonic academy previously headed by Aleister Crowley. By the age of 10, Ivan, Tsar of Russia, would personally oversee the torturing of so-called political prisoners. These were people who had merely been critical of his power. He committed his first rape at the age of 11. He was crowned in 1547 and diverted public attention away from their own abject poverty by entering into war with Poland and Lithuania. Tsar Ivan took thousands of prisoners and personally supervised their torture, often devising the most wicked torture techniques himself. Tsar Ivan positively relished the screams of people as they had their eyes torn out. Women and even children were disemboweled, mauled by wild bears for his amusement, and people had parts of their bodies cut off